Members of Parliament, Chairman of Campus Council, Mr. Paul Altman, Principal of the Cavell Campus, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Deputy Principal, Professor Udine Barito, featured speaker, Sir Keith Hunt, permanent secretaries, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Judiciary, Campus Registrar, Mrs. Jacqueline Wade, Campus Bursar, Mr. David Miles, Mr. Andrew Lewis, Chairman of the 50th Anniversary Committee, Deans, Heads of Departments, members of the campus community, students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I welcome you to the second in the series of lectures to mark the 50th anniversary celebrations of the University of the West Indies Cavell campus. The first public lecture was delivered by Professor Sir Woodville Marshall, who addressed the topic, Errol Barrow's vision in establishing the Cavell campus last week. Tonight's lecture will be delivered by the former principal and pro-vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies Cavell campus, Sir Keith Hunt, who will speak on the topic, the Cavell campus, building capacity. I am pleased to welcome Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Principal and Pro-Vice Chancellor, University of the West Indies Cavell campus, to the podium to deliver opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Professor Ventos, and colleagues. I ought to say to you that you have just heard our chairman, who is the youngest professor in the history of UWI, Professor Ventos. Excellencies of the Diplomatic Corps, Ministers of Government, Mr. Altman, our Chairman of Campus Council, Sir Keith and his friends and family, members of the Cavell community, our retirees, our underpaid hard workers, our students, members of the media, good evening. What an extraordinary honor it is for me to have the privilege to say a few remarks in respect of Sir Keith and his presentation this evening. You would have heard brilliant, meticulous lecture by Sir Woodville last week, and I should tell you that I have observed and have worked closely with these two gentlemen for many, many, many years, and it's best to describe them as really Greenwich and Hinds. So I'm not going to say who is Greenwich and who's Hinds, but to watch them together, it really is a perfect partnership of historical analysis and interpretation. And of course, if we are treated to an exhibition by Greenwich and Hinds, then you must feel sorry for the poor fellow who's going to bat number 3. But Sir Keith has been a special person in my own journey in this university for many years. I served as a dean, as a head of department, and deaned under his administration. Learnt many good things, learnt many bad things. But all the good things and bad things were very useful. And very very, very important indeed. That relationship is special for a number of reasons, because you'll be aware that I was given the opportunity to join the Cavell campus when Sir Keith was appointed principal. He was appointed principal in 1984, I think it was, and I met him in the bar at Mona, and council had just appointed him principal, and he said to me, well, Hilary, if you wish to return to Cavell, you have an opportunity, because there is now a vacancy in the history department. And he says, if you want to come home, call Woodville, he will arrange everything. And so I returned to Cavell I came to Cavell to replace Sir Keith, and Then 2002, I returned to KFL again to replace Sir Keith. So twice I have followed him to Barbados, and the logic of that sequence would be that I have a very keen interest in his next job. And I would wish him to consult me before he make any major decisions about his next job. But I can say that when I came to KFL as principal, I found a campus beautifully run, a very coherent community at KFL, a community that functioned in a very collegial fashion. There was very little conflict. Everyone was pulling on the same rope, and it really was an extraordinary legacy to inherit. Importantly, I found a campus that was respected in the community, and also an office of the principal that was also deeply respected in the country and in the community. And these were assets that we do not take lightly, because it requires a tremendous amount of effort and hard work to build those, what we call social skills, the soft capital, as we call it. And of course, he had built upon the legacy of Sir Sidney. He was very close to Sir Sidney Martin. They had great confidence in each other, and I'm sure he will speak about many of those things tonight. It certainly for him has been a wonderful journey. And Sir Keith, let me say here this evening that on behalf of the KFL campus, the campus community, we really thank you for leaving us a foundation on which we could build a legacy of collegiality. We have been working very hard to maintain that collegiality, that we stick together in difficult times. I certainly was with you in the early 90s when things were very, very hard, and now things are hard again. But because of the traditions of leadership and diplomacy which you bequeath to us, we are able nonetheless to pull through in the context of that tradition. So, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a pleasure to welcome you all and to invite you to thoroughly enjoy the presentation of our much loved and beloved Sir Keith. Thank you.
Sir Keith Hunte, former principal of the KFL campus and pro-vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies, has made a significant contribution to the development of the KFL campus and the university as a whole for over 40 years. Sir Keith attended primary and secondary schools in Barbados. He gained admission to the University College of the West Indies at Mona, Jamaica in 1956, and took an honors degree in history, graduating in 1959. This was followed by master's and doctoral degrees at McGill University, the years of the award being 1962 and 1965. Sir Keith joined the staff of the university in Barbados as an assistant lecturer in 1964. He was promoted to lecturer in 1965 and senior lecturer in 1975. He was appointed deputy principal of the KFL campus in 1980, and prior to that appointment, he served as vice dean of the Faculty of Arts and General Studies on several occasions, and as head of the department. He also served as dean from 1978 to 1980, and was appointed acting principal of the KFL campus in September 1983 to November 1983 as well, when he was appointed pro-vice chancellor and principal of the KFL campus from 1983, a position he held for approximately 19 years until his retirement in 2002. As campus principal, Sir Keith oversaw a considerable growth in the campus, the steady expansion of its student numbers, along with the charismatic regional mix and its growing international dimension, the expansion and continuous renewing of its curriculum, and the substantial modernization of its physical infrastructure for teaching and research. Over the years, he successfully piloted the campus through a number of challenges that threatened its course and direction. The campus nonetheless emerged stronger and more resilient for the testing. At university level, his capacity to manage change effectively was evident when he was invited to design and lead the implementation of the semester system across the university in 1990, and to head the unit that will oversee the implementation of the recommendations from the Chancellor's Commission on Governance beginning in 1996. He also played a pivotal role in the design and implementation of the various university strategic plans. I now invite Sir Keith to the podium to deliver this evening's lecture, entitled Cable Campus Building Capacity. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and let me particularly greet members of the High Court, ministers of government, members of Parliament, chairman of our campus council, other senior university officers, Dean Emeritus, and a whole lot of you, all distinguished, all members of the diplomatic corps. I'm sure I got that out of line. If I seem just a little flustered, it's because I was. I almost had to wing it for the next hour. And if I hadn't recognized that my colleague, Professor Sir Woodville Marshall, in the audience, I thought I might just have been able to get away with it. Thank you, John, because you see, I am at the front end of a computer, but if it coughs, I need help. And I'm glad that we were able to get the final version, at least, off. Let me, Sir Hilary, thank you and the members of your committee for giving me this opportunity to do what I used to do for a living, but which now involves work that I find to be harder and harder, except that the series of lectures, and particularly the stimulating kickoff we had. I think he prefers to be a cricketer, but I better stay with the football image from Professor Sir Woodville Marshall last week, stimulated me to at least be worthy of batting number 2. Let me just say why. Let's say up to about 2 months before I had the privilege and the opportunity to go to the Mona campus in 1956. I never thought I had the realistic prospect of getting there. But I benefited from the fact that I was one of 4 children and that I happened to be the youngest. And my parents decide to splurge. No, not in the way you think, by mortgaging their property. Because what came to me was an offer of a place. The second sheet indicated the fees payable, not the economic cost. So having looked at that, my father said that when he saw the mail, I said, I better reply and decline. He said, do no such thing until I tell you. I make that point because I could not have wished for a better way of preparing myself for the profession that I later was able to pursue. It was a time when effectively the encounter with fellow West Indians in an not intimate, an informal environment where the distance, social distance between the staff and students was not at all significant. Dr. Auger, for example, I believe I heard more of him when he invited us to have a drink in the evening and to discuss all things than in a formal setting. But I want to make this point to begin with because there were some setbacks. My biggest is the build-up to federation, when the critical point being discussed across the region was whether Michael Manley would opt to lead the party into the federal election. And I remember us going down to Halfway Tree the Sunday evening that he decided that he would announce his decision by bus. And the meeting may have been advertised to start at 9, but I think it was at least 2 hours later before Michael Manley appeared on the platform. Florizel Gladstone tried to hold the unions together, but it was falling apart because he had run out of... thank you. Yeah. And my point really is, when Manley got up to speak, Halfway Tree was quiet. Not a pin dropped, as it were. And then he fed into his electorate. And I recognized that we might be losing him, those of us who thought that he might have opted for the federation. And then his final statement was, and for these reasons, I have decided to stay with you. My point is that I felt that something was missing from the federal parliament in that decision. And I don't want to say that later events proved me right. I don't believe in those things about prophecies and that's way. I'm simply underlining the fact that there were exciting times extending from the period of the establishment of the University College of the West Indies right through to the present. And Principal, they're getting perhaps too exciting for you at this moment, and you therefore have my full understanding and sympathy. But there are successes over the last 50 years. There have been setbacks. Some of us may be too long in the tooth and old to try to reverse some of these setbacks, but appealing to the younger members of the audience. Many of the good things that happened in the Caribbean were not unplanned. People thought they would wish to work for them and expended energy, intellectual and otherwise, into strategizing them. So that yes, the Federation collapsed in 1961 with consequences to the university, some of which I will identify. But there are other tasks that we seem to feel that we can do nothing about. What about a single market and economy? The question is, can we afford to do without it? And yet I hear day after day all kinds of speeches and call-in programs about the devastating impact of the world recession, yes, on our productive efforts. But I always say suppose we survived, as Hillary started, what are we going to do with the opportunity that we've been given? I thought I would start there and link that with my reflections on the road we have traveled in the university and especially here at the Cave Hill campus. Let me acknowledge the presence of Mrs. Austin Aline. I hadn't recognized that she'd be with us this evening, but I should have known. Good to see you. And she is one of the, shall I say, significant actresses in the drama of the building of the university, having been the only registrarial officer, assistant registrar, to serve at all 3 campuses. Join me in applauding. I wish to acknowledge the generous assistance I have received from my colleague, Mrs. Jackie Wade, current registrar, campus registrar, from the archivists and the members of her staff, from Mr. Andrew Lewis, who was able to draw on his many years as head of the campus planning unit and as campus registrar, and all those who, in the past 2 weeks, have assisted me in locating critical documents and have shared with me important information about the Cave Hill journey. This evening, I propose to share with you what I consider to be some of the more significant aspects of the Cave Hill experience, focusing mainly on the first 40 years, because if I'm worthy to be considered to replace either of these distinguished cricketers, the big innings is to come. And I certainly look forward to it. So I thought I would stay with the 40 years because I would have had to do much more catching up. But I'm aware of it, sir. And it is the fact that you have demonstrated that acceleration was possible, that effectively my task is easy, because essentially it is what is happening now that means that you didn't entirely, that's I, may not have entirely wrecked the vehicle. I've chosen then to build it around the theme, building capacity. This is an attempt to isolate a thread that links successive phases in the development of this branch of the university as it moved from the status of a college of arts and sciences to that of a campus, and to note that the upgrade from college to campus followed closely on the heels of the decision to establish the Faculty of Law at Cave Hill. A critical moment in the life of this branch of the university came in 1986, when the government of Barbados appointed a committee of eminent persons under the chairmanship of former Vice Chancellor Sir Roy Marshall, with the following terms of reference. 1, to review the development of the Cave Hill campus over the past 7 years against the background of its stated goals. The other terms of reference were to evaluate the existing structure, academic and administrative, from the standpoint of the institution's role in contributing to the intellectual, economic, social, and cultural foundations of the societies it serves. 3, to advise on the medium and long-term development of the Cave Hill campus, including necessary changes and new directions to make the institution more responsive to the needs of those societies. 4, to advise on an appropriate framework within which the campus and tertiary level or other institutions in Barbados could collaborate to maintain and enhance the quality of higher education in the island. Finally, in the light of and consistent with their findings in the foregoing terms of reference, to consider the possibility of reduction in costs, and in that event, to advise on an appropriate machinery for determining and effecting such reduction, having regard to the respective roles of government, the Campus Grants Committee, and the campus itself in the matter. When I re-established contact with this document while preparing for this, every now and again you wonder why it is that you had learned certain things. And I remember, Selwyn Smith, my nearest contemporary from Lodge, was here with me, learning that an epigram is a witty saying with a sting in the tail. I'm not saying this is an epigram. I'm simply saying that it reminded me that there was a sting in it somewhere and one had to look for it. No, the point is here, and I will link up with this later. Professor Sir Arthur Lewis, as Sir Woodville so aptly demonstrated, had a vision also for dealing with higher education, other than relying almost exclusively on a single regional institution of higher learning. And he thought that there are other instruments to build human capital, and thought that governments could be, within the limits of their resources, look to establish and maintain colleges of education and other later community colleges and other tertiary level institutions to do a variety of tasks in collaboration with institutions like the University of the West Indies. As the original plan lacked a concept of dynamic growth and change for the society, in the sense that the numbers that it envisaged dealing with certainly did not match, nor were they intended to match. What seemed to have informed that script is the almost quintessentially British idea is that if you're going to deal with a society, make certain that the leaders have the right kind of exposure. It will then fall into place, of course, intellectual depth and all the rest of it, but one has to be sure that behaviors and how to negotiate, how to get through crises in quote-unquote a structured way, that ought to be part of the training. But there was bound to be a collision, of course, between that model and the instruments of education that would be required from persons who were anxious to shuffle off the limitations and the impoverished diet, including educational diet of the past, and create better lives for their children than they were able to enjoy. And the political instincts of our leaders in the course of that first 10 years indicated that they were not unaware of the need to, in addition to supporting the University College of the West Indies, to make haste to indicate that there would be a substantial and sustainable increase in the throughput of persons proceeding to post-secondary education and able to access the skills particularly the higher level skills that our societies then and now so badly need. The link between that and the terms of reference that I referred is that there was a matter that a government could legitimately be concerned about. We've had the college on our doorstep now, that's in 1986, from 1963. That is what puzzles me, because I didn't quite understand why the focus was restricted to the preceding 7 years. But that aside, the impact on the administrators and the persons who have the collective responsibility within the university for developing curricula and setting targets for programs offered by these institutions. That task quite often brings them into conflict with the views, wishes, desires, policies, formal or informal, of the governments. When, again, to just anchor this on the introduction that we heard last week, when the St. Augustine campus became, when the St. Augustine complex became the second campus of the university, coming out of the blocks with the transfer of Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture to being the Faculty of Agriculture, shortly followed thereafter by the establishment of the Faculty of Engineering, and this engine was fueled by a government of Trinidad and Tobago that effectively had access to resources to do just that. And then the College of Arts and Sciences came on about the same time that we did. The Federation had already broken up. Had it not, then they would have been dealing closely with a single governmental authority in relation to planning and resource management for the region. What happened as a result of the establishment of these initial colleges and their becoming big players within the university was what would soon be manifested in a big way both at Mona and at the St. Augustine campus. Any tensions developing between the university community that inhabit the boundaries of the country and not just the government party, but any one of the major parties or outside of the parties, the people that matter in the society, would generate tensions that would have to be managed. The story is successive vice chancellors have had to manage these tensions, none more so than the person chosen to chair the committee to look into the Cavell campus, that is Sir Roy Marshall. For after all, during his tenure, it seemed as if things, not because of him, just happened to be there, the society in Jamaica became very inward-looking and sensitive about who had the right to comment. And it's not peculiar to there. I promise you that Barbados is quite capable of matching that behavior if effectively they are allowed if people are not challenged in relation to going in that direction. The reason, though, that I thought I would pay some attention to this is that the news of the establishment of this committee, the university took seriously, especially those of us on the campus. Largely because it sought to get from the committee an identification of possible sources of waste, with the end result that if it was government funds being wasted, then economies might have been identified. What I would say for the early administrations of the university and Sir Sidney Martin's administration here is not that I'm not denying that there could have been waste, but there could not have been much waste, because they did not rely, whether you're talking about Vice Chancellor Preston when he succeeded us, or Sidney Martin, he did not rely on the persons who were paid to do the numbers. He checked the numbers and effectively engaged in the debate as to whether effectively he would want to back those up. What is important is that the committee that comprised Vice Chancellor Marshall, Professor Charles Bourne, a Barbadian who was a senior academic in law at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Dennis Irvin, then Vice Chancellor of the University of Guyana, and a prominent local businessman, Mr. Stanley Chapman. They found that the campus has been stretched to capacity for the whole of its existence. That's 1986-87. And the time has come for an injection of additional resources to take it beyond the margin of viability at which it has operated for so long. We make specific recommendations in this vein at several other places in the report. That view relates to what I think my colleagues and I lived through in the early years of Cato. There were not many frills. When we traveled other places, we could see things that we wish we could have done here. However, we developed a habit. I don't want to call it a culture, that's too ambitious. We developed a habit of recognizing that if we were to achieve our professional objectives, whether it's in history or in economics or in biology, and I know why I'm citing these areas, then we have, first of all, to have a vision and a plan. And we dare not afford to wait for the day when the University Grants Committee initially and/or the Campus Grants Committee would say, okay, do you need 3 staff? Because that pie was not being delivered anytime soon. That was understood by senior colleagues or colleagues who didn't have seniority but who were cast in the role of having to represent their section, department, or faculty. And as a result, we prided ourselves, and here Mr. Victor Cook and Mr. Lewis could attest to it, in that what we put up to committees, we could defend, even though we knew that having defended it well, we would not necessarily get the full loaf. Our understanding of the circumstances that led to the decision to establish a College of Arts and Sciences has benefited, I say, from Professor Sir Woodville Marshall's penetrating analysis of relevant data, which was on display last Thursday as he delivered the first of this series of lectures entitled Errolsborough's Vision in Establishing the Cave Hill Campus. Let me put a footnote here. The return to Barbados of Woodville Marshall was an important event to the small number of historians that were then struggling with the task of getting published. What we didn't know before he came is that when he applies himself to analyzing administrative challenges, he is, I don't want to say was, I will never use the past tense, equally formidable. But it was not just he, it's the likes of Arthur Drayton and others who, realizing the oneness of the university, opted to come to Cave Hill for whatever reason and brought with them a dimension, not that they told us what to do, a dimension of what to do that came out of their experience of another place. And we benefited significantly from that. And there is a story that I will tell later in another context that will make that point even more germane. I need to put in context then the geopolitical landscape within which the University of the West Indies was established at the parent campus Mona in Jamaica in 1948, which required successive administrations that, while the constitution of the institution set out in the Royal Charter, which has been amended and revised on a number of occasions, while that constitution gives the university the powers needful for the execution of its mandate, we have a responsibility to be responsive to the express submissions of the governments who represent the people who put them in office, and therefore, effectively, there's no way that a college or campus or university can fulfill its mandate without making a special effort to be informed of the priorities of the taxpayers and seek somehow or other to comprehend within the overall plan an appropriate approach and or response to making contact with it. Why? Well, if you don't, then the conversation that you are going to have across the room with the representatives of the particular country is likely to run into serious difficulty. During the short lifespan of the federal government, there was some prospect that over time, decisions on the funding of the university programs would benefit from the existence of a federal authority with whom a constructive working relationship might have meant that the university, the respective campuses, faculties, and departments know that they must have an ongoing dialogue with each member country in order to ensure that the teaching, research, and service programs that are being planned and or executed by each entity responds to a need or a prospect that enables the university's response to it to attract endorsement and the support from the host country and from the community that stands to benefit from the initiative. That the university, its campuses, including the open campus and its specialized units, continue to enjoy a fair measure of support from the wider regional and national community is demonstrative of the fact that the leadership within the university has learnt this lesson and continues effectively to reach out to secure a better understanding of how effectively the legitimate demands, the legitimate goals of the society can be approached. The story of the Cave Hill campus then, over its first 50 years, is worth telling. Current programs and the current strategic vision have gone way beyond the mandate and the role which had been initially scripted. Professor Marshall, I refer to that lecture again, has dealt adequately with the historical context within which the decision was taken by the university to establish a College of Arts and Sciences in Barbados. What is irrefutable is that the enthusiasm with which the government of Barbados welcomed the prospect as an opportunity to break out of the mold of a single campus university, the positive response of the host community to the project, and the relative ease with which the college was able to recruit qualified and highly motivated auxiliary staff, academic staff, to complement the relatively modest number of full-time staff that were available in the early years. The excitement reflected in the response of the early cohorts of students to the opportunity that was now theirs to have a university education here at home. All of these factors produced a once-in-a-lifetime existential moment that was shared by those of us who were able to be part of it. Newly appointed assistant lecturer in history, my friend and colleague Tony Marshall, Tony Phillips. I don't know why I swerved. Tony Phillips got here 1 year before me and effectively got the game started in relation to the teaching of history. I followed in 1964. Conversation with us, once we had got past the pleasantries, went like this. He said to me, "What course would you like to teach?" I said, "What courses remain to be taught?" He having taught one, I then selected the other. And it must have meant something for the kind of education I had in my first degree that I just had to go and bone it up. But we could effectively do that. But the encounter with the students in temporary makeshift facilities at the harbor was again a pleasant kind of memory, for I knew by reputation a fair number of our first students, the likes of Mr. Gilmore Rochford, Mr. Glenroy Strawn, and a couple of years later, Mr. Isaac Carmichael. For those of you who don't know, these were my seniors. I would normally, if I met them on the road, say, "Good morning, sir," and continue to do so. But here's the story. Prior to the opening of the College of Arts and Sciences, several of the people whose names I call had already taken Wolseley Hall courses and were working their way through the inter-BA program of London University and would then go on to complete a degree in order effectively to improve their chances of employment and promotion. We had, therefore, a mixture of age bands in the class, which particularly as one effectively engaged these students in tutorials, showed the pluses and minuses were there, but it was a rich, I suggest, learning environment for participants in this exercise. The task of leading the effort to make the necessary arrangements to ensure that the teaching program would start on time in 1963 had been assigned to Professor Leslie Robinson, liaising with Pro-Vice Chancellor Dudley Huggins, commuting from Trinidad. The next year, the newly appointed principal of the college, Mr. Sidney Martin, later Sir Sidney, arrived and took up office on transfer from the post of registrar. He was a physical chemist and taught in the chemistry department before moving into administration. He proved himself equal to the challenge. The process of recruiting staff, networking with government leaders and officials, shaping and leading the fledgling administration, liaising with academic and administrative staff, maintaining good relations with the heads of schools who had agreed to give the college generous access to required office space, science laboratory facilities, etc. Some of these responsibilities, the path had been blazed by Leslie Robinson in the very productive 1 year that he was on ground here. It was not long before he would be preparing briefs, that is, Sidney Martin, for the guidance of the architects appointed to plan the construction of the buildings at the new site at Cave Hill. At the time, ably assisted by Mr. Fred Phillips, college secretary, and Mr. Victor Cook, accountant, later finance officer. The academic programs were launched on schedule. The process of building and energizing the college was underway. The academic program of the college was managed then by the Faculty of General Studies, with headquarters, the Office of the Dean, located at Mona. Dr. Richard also had been appointed lecturer in use of English, of course, chairman of the Division of Social Sciences and Survey Courses, and first vice dean of the Faculty of General Studies at a later time. He also found the time to assist in those days with the teaching of French and to lecture on West Indian authors within some of the English literature programs. It was a measure of the contribution made by a long list of professionals, including persons like Miss Gloria Cummins, Mr. Rudolph Goodrich, who would later join the faculty of the university in the School of Education, serve as deputy principal, and later as Pro-Vice Chancellor and Director of the Office of University Services, but at that time as a co-opted teacher in the nascent program. Also, Mr. Steve Emptage, the Present Director of Finance and Planning, and I was able by chance to benefit from a little bit of oral history fairly painlessly given. I recognize that Mr. W.E., that is Eric Armstrong, had been appointed, as Tony Phillips had been the year before, to take up. He couldn't arrive on time, and hence, when the panic button was pressed, they co-opted Mr. Steve Emptage, who, beyond that year, continued effectively to contribute significantly to the early teaching in economics at Cave Hill. The Cave Hill campus, then, is an integral part of a three-campus University of the West Indies, which was first established as a university college, as you well know. Even before the university became autonomous, new programs had been introduced. at the Mona campus, social sciences in 1959, agriculture in 1960, and engineering in 1961, advanced nursing in 1967, management studies and accounting, and here, the Faculty of Law in 1970. Library studies, meteorology, 1973, 1975, hotel management, 1976, and more recently, computer science, postgraduate programs in engineering, legislative drafting, and land surveying, among others. A third manifestation of change is seen in the restructuring of the university's management system and in the method of its financing. It's important to note that the period in 1979 to 1981, the University Grants Committee and the recently established Campus Grants Committee were unable to fund expansion and new developments, not only in that triennium, 3-year cycle, but they repeated the bad news on the next round. This fact provides the key to understanding how the growth and development of the Cave Hill campus in those days benefited tremendously from recognizing that incremental growth was nevertheless growth, and to find ways of effectively, and here's where Victor Cook was extremely good. Victor Cook, if, as it were, you understood that he was not opposed to you, for if you go into a confrontation with Victor, you probably lose. But if you said, let us discuss this matter, he and a number of the financial managers in the university that have done, I suppose he might have been well trained beyond the early training he had with the maestro himself, the late Aston Preston. That was his approach as well. If you want help, let's talk, we could find a way out. If you want confrontation, well, that's easy. So the point I'm making then is that if you seek to link the incremental expansion of programs, the introduction of new subjects, the halting but nevertheless relentless incremental growth in student enrollment at the campus, to the supply of new funds, there's certain times that you will see a benefit, but there will at times be a disconnect. And that point, therefore, I believe that I have made and will now leave it. On occasions, departments and faculties, normally in a state of competition for scarce resources, would agree to forego their respective claims and allow, let's say, the library, on whom we heavily depended, to make good on its deficiencies out of such small savings as we may have realized on aspects of our budgets. Two examples of infrastructural support for research and recognizing the need to reduce the need for researchers in West Indian social legal will help us illustrate the point. And here, once again, I have to give him his due. The occasion was when Woodville came and joined us as a senior and head department in history and in the office of the faculty as dean. Again, many of us were trying to sustain our professional interest and get access to records, but the trek to the United Kingdom was de rigueur if an alternate approach could not be worked out. At his prompting, he and others engaged important allies in the quest. First, Michael Gill, the librarian at Cave Hill. Secondly, the archivist, the government archivist. Thirdly, Chalmers Sinthill, the government librarian, and hammered out an understanding that it would be in their interest and ours to build up their holdings in historical documents of interest to scholars of any aspect of Barbadian history. And that to the extent that they were able, given all the rules under which they operated as public officers, to get the necessary clearance to contribute to a plan to have a systematic and gradual acquisition of documents over time, there would be no breach of any financial rules for the funds that were used effectively to purchase documents from the archives would stay there. The only things that would come into our library are the funds from us that would go there, but it didn't matter. A union catalog would indicate, if you had started to work, that if you wish to read accessing, then go to the next place. Again, I linked that one up. When Andrew Lewis and myself and others responded to almost 100 questions that Sir Roy Marshall had put to us before the committee came on ground, and I only discovered it recently, Andrew picked up this thing that we had routinely reported to our colleagues in our annual accounting session from the departments, what was happening in the departments. And it contributed significantly to the favorable rating that the campus got, because they had been asked to report on areas of wastage. And they were able to go in a different direction to say, we haven't yet discovered it, but far from that, here is one of a few creative ways of dealing with shortage of funds. I will leave that point there, because long may this virus flourish at the campus, and where it looks as if it's in trouble, get Henry Fraser to administer something to get it happening again. Because it's probably going to be not just this idea, not the idea, the approach, very necessary, because none of the major formidable challenges that our economies face seem to me to be removable in a hurry on a sustainable basis. Motivation of staff is extremely important. Colleagueship is very important. And I think, therefore, that that matters in relation to delivering on the mandate, since in a number of instances, the people from whom the mandate came cannot at all times afford to fund the mandate at the level that is required. I have to put alongside of that the example next door from the Faculty of Natural Sciences of the biology department and Dr. Una Moore, where, again, that department was one of the science departments that at a certain period in the 70s or 80s was moving, recruiting staff that were motivated, etc. Dr. Moore had been here for a while, but what was interesting is that she identified resource management and environmental studies as a dimension that was missing from the program, particularly as it would relate to the community and the environment. Again, I look in vain to find out when that program may have been adequately funded. Never. One staff may have been assigned at a particular time, but beyond that. But things happened that demonstrated to her colleagues and to the wider society that one does not have to wait for the $1 million effectively to get something happen. Indeed, in a number of instances, the investment of getting the thing off the ground enhances one's chances of attracting those larger numbers. Senior academic colleagues well understood that in circumstances where the constant in the equation was that there was a scarcity of resources, that it was important to build a case for securing a portion of the scarce resources, and that one's case would be the stronger for being able to demonstrate the effective and efficient use of resources previously allocated. The growth of the Faculty of Social Sciences brings me to my growth story. And here I'm happy to identify and recognize Sir Frank Aline over on the left, because I seem to remember that a team of two, of whom he was but one partner, the late Wendell McLean being the other partner, was relentless in reminding Sidney Martin's academic board and yes, mine, as to how effectively social sciences at this campus was being neglected. But more importantly, that was to get your attention. I always learned in the Army that the purpose of a bugle call is to get your attention. You haven't got the call, you now must say what you want done. And what they wanted done was a recognition that had not been there in the original statement of subjects, that there was a real demand among candidates in the university for access to social sciences programs, both of the pure variety, but also what would follow from that is public administration, management studies, and accounting in a number of forms. So that, not surprisingly, it was not long, if you look at the figures, before those of us in the arts and humanities could not compete with them in a strong case for staff in relation to demand, because that's where it was. Nor did we mind. We wanted success next door as well, because after all, it's not a numbers game all the way. But I thought that I couldn't have this lecture without identifying, and I know I'm looking at people now here. It's always invidious to identify persons, but in this particular case, I feel that I need, particularly in this particular audience, to say the campus was not built by one person, nor was it built exclusively by academics. I start with Ted Rice. Now, Ted Rice was a character whom we met when we went to the Deepwater Harbor I wanted to identify his major trade or skill, but he was a man of several trades and skills. He reported to a Mr. Ward, clerk of works, who had the loudest voice on the temporary site that was the campus. But my point about Ted Rice is that he got the job done, whether it was plumbing, a detached window, etc. And he was not alone in relation to building up a strong loyalty to the institution for which he worked. There are many others, and I therefore want to indicate that yes, it is possible for those of you who have not had the direct experience. It is possible for good colleagueship and a good positive work environment to bring persons into a team without reference to title or rank. That is simple. Everyone has something to offer if provided an opportunity. At a large campus and university and a large business, they require a special effort to say those words that I just said. For us, however, it makes much more sense not to neglect the opportunities in which we can induce and sustain higher motivation across staff and students, yes, and visitors to our campus. I want quickly then to move towards my closing remarks. The contribution of our vice-chancellors, for the most part, that contribution has to be acknowledged, because without exception, those who served during my tenure had a strong commitment to the goals and long-term achievements of the institution. I want to indicate that by the time that we had the opportunity to benefit from the leadership of Vice-Chancellor Sir Alistair McIntyre, that he was quick to identify what may have been missing in our programs, particularly our programs that should have linked to the productive sectors, the business sector, and the teaching of management studies, etc. So he effectively, with the strong support of officers from the Faculty of Social Sciences, sought to mobilize from each campus community engagement with the business leaders as well as the public sector management leaders in order to effectively lay the foundations for the establishment of schools of management studies. The assignment that I was given was effectively to do so, but not exclusively for Barbados. That it should be something that engaged Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. I was greatly helped at the time that there were persons who were fairly active in the local and regional business community, like Sir John Stanley Goddard, like Mr. Ken Boyer. I was also lucky that Mr. Thompson was at the time the Caribbean Association of Industry and Commerce. And therefore, I did not have myself to do much legwork. But what, again, was refreshing is that once the right buttons had been pushed, the center got off the ground, the recognition of the difficulty that many potential recruits would have had if they had to take time off from their work was recognized, and consequently in the scheduling of the classes, that point was taken into account, and therefore bringing persons in for weekend intensive sessions was one of the strategies there. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought I would take this opportunity not to exhaust you, though it might seem that I am close to that, but to inform you and to share with you some very small number of the approaches that, not by themselves, turn things around, but as the American civil rights leader says, kept hope alive. And effectively, what we have now is a thriving campus community under the leadership of my friend and colleague, Sir Hilary, but also other leaders, many of whom are in the audience, who need to know that we are rooting for you, who need to know, we in the community. You see, there is life after principalship, and I intend to vote and to do all such things as citizens ought to be doing, but I'm quite serious here. We were very pleased, many of us, as we moved around the region, to discover how well thought of the university, which some people had not themselves physically encountered other than through persons who've gone there, was. Certainly in Barbados, you don't have to move far to discover that the people of this country at all walks of life are perhaps more ambitious and want our success much more fervently than we did. Why? Because they are relating it to the people closest to them, their sons, their daughters, their cousins down the road. With such backing, I wish to extend the very best wishes to the university administration on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, and particularly to the administration at the Cave Hill campus. And I wish to assure you that if you do not ask me to speak again too soon, I will appreciate it.
We will now ask if anyone has any questions. We'll take a couple of questions at this time.
Yes. Simon.
The mic.
Thank you. Your comment about your own university financing led me to think along lines that I've often thought about, because over my years as dean and previously, I have always been impressed by the difficulty that Barbadian students have had in securing loans compared to colleagues in other countries, particularly in North America, where university education is predominantly based on loans. And of course, that can produce millstones around necks. But we have been, I think, very, very different in that regard. And considering the debt owed to the university by the government and the financial difficulties to which you alluded at the beginning, it has always puzzled me why, understanding that there are huge sums of money in banks of Barbados, which conservative businessmen in Barbados, and we know how conservative our colleagues are, have enormous difficulty in exercising entrepreneurial ideas and investing that money to produce better financial outcomes. Considering the money in the banks and considering the other paradigms for university financing, and considering that we know that no government of Barbados would wish to contradict the concept of barrel for free tertiary education, with all of that context, I do not quite understand why we cannot engage the commercial sector, the money in the banks, with appropriately designed arrangements for university funding loans to students, paying particular attention to the categories of training which are most required, and with very soft loan arrangements to accommodate the students, and bearing in mind those faculties and those disciplines which will produce the most remunerative financial outcomes. So this is the paradigm, I think, that requires a little bit of thinking outside of the box for Barbados. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever considered it as principle, and do you think it holds water?
Good questions. Let me say, however, and I want as my point of departure to just reflect a little bit on your, what they call in the field of Calypso, the hook line of nobody can speak against free education, and I will never be speaking against it. But you know, it's not free. It's not free, it's affordable. And I want you to reflect on that, because in a number of instances, bad labeling loses sales, even sales of ideas. My point is, and I answer your question by saying, no, I cannot claim that this active searching for these strategies was high on my agenda. I was aware then because I had had several occasions when I had been asked by parents, guardians, or persons themselves that wanted to study to co-sign. And I had some scares when, long after they had graduated, I got increasingly terse and threatening letters from the Higher Education Loan Fund. So it was during that time that I was absolutely interested when I understood that the Commonwealth of Australia had some time ago sought to do two things: expand the regime for access to loans for persons pursuing higher education, but B, absolutely improving and tightening up the administration of the loan. In short, a person who is in default of a loan, who works anywhere in the Commonwealth of Australia, is not going to continue getting done in letters. His wages will be garnished. Now, I want now to go to banks. If you can succeed in this, I'm going to move you down from the Senate to the lower house. Because, you see, the reason that I am not aware that there have been many cases in which the banks are seeing this as other than a goodwill gesture is that the rates of interest have to be effectively suitably adjusted to meet the situation that even when the candidate has done whatever number of years and goes to work, he or she has a number of other responsibilities. So I would suggest, as you reflect further on it, that perhaps a combination of public and private funding would A, respond to the need that you have identified, but perhaps get around the difficulty. I do not think that the government should withdraw, for example, from contributing to making access to higher loan funds available. Not every program, for example, can be had at the Cayfield campus. And it's important for that to be there, but it would be an excellent idea to explore the possibility of complementing this opportunity by access to private sector funding.
One question.
Yes?
Sir Keith, I just want to make one small comment, and it is this. I really, really enjoyed Sir Woodville Marshall's address last week, which was very academic. I enjoyed your presentation tonight because it opened my eyes to how one can very clearly see the strategies that Barbadian householders use, Barbadian villagers use, that my parents use to eke out the kind of future for their children that they want. How you can see the link between that and how an institution as huge as a University of the West Indies Cayfield campus. It felt like seeing appropriate technology happening at the level of a university, and it was an eye-opener, and I really enjoyed the presentation that you made. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll open the floor to one last question, if any.
Yes? Ah, you are hiding there. Mr. Victor Cook, good to see you.
In connection, hello. In connection with the point that our illustrious Sir Henry Fraser, I'm knighting you tonight. You remember that in 1955, 1956, there was a committee appointed with Leonard Shorey and yourself and myself and a couple of other people, and we were looking at this same question, which is nothing new. And we came up with a report. Of course, it had never seen the light of day, because the minister at that time said there was no way that person, she was going to go against what Errol Barrow had put in, about free secondary education. But we made the same point, that loans should be made more accessible to all students in a kind of a systematic way, that nobody who wanted to have tertiary education would be denied, but there would be loans to be repaid once a person started to work. We should really dust off that report. Somebody put it in 513, but I think we should dust it off and bring it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it on? I think before we go too deeply into the concept of passing the burden of financing education away from the state to the citizen, I think there's something you have to ask yourself. Let us assume that this $180–90 million owed to the university, let's assume that that's a monster. let's assume it's a monster. Then you have to ask yourself, how are monsters created? Then you have to ask yourself, why are monsters created? Then you have to ask yourself, how long does it take to make a monster? Now, if the purpose of the monster is to scare people, there is a monster out there, so stay home. Then you have to ask yourself, what is the relation between the maker of the monster and those who are meant to stay home? So, the notion of saying that there is a monster and therefore we need to rethink whether we leave home or not is really a function of your relationship to other sources of power. And I'm very clear on that. The thing that is now called a monster, which is the approaching 200 million, it's important for each citizen to ask the question, in the presence of this monster, what are your choices of thought? You can then say, I will stay home, or you can say, I have to slay that monster. And if your freedom is based on slaying that monster, you have to slay it. If you wish to be cowardice and stay at home, well, stay at home and shut up the window and tell your children, don't leave after dark. So what Professor Fraser has done is to ask the question, now we have a monster and we're all afraid. We better start thinking smart. And I'm saying to you, to think of the genealogy of the monster, how long it took to make, why was it made, who made it, what was it intended to do, and how are you supposed to respond in the presence of the monster? And I would put those questions out there, they need not be answered.
I'm working on it.
I wish to thank Sir Keith for his presentation, which took us from the beginnings of the Cable Campus, the early years, through the 1980s, the struggles of the 80s, the expansion of various programs, the struggles with the University Grants Committee and the Campus Grants Committee, the development of the Faculty of Social Sciences and all the implications therefrom, and importantly, the theme towards the end of his talk, that of loyalty. Loyalty and commitment to the institution. The commitment of those founding fathers, those persons who have kept the campus going through 50 years. The academic staff, the ATS staff, and everyone. I thank you. I also wish to thank the staff of the Campus Registrar's Office, the staff of the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination, the staff of the Educational Media Services, the University of West Indies ushers, and you, the audience, for attending this evening.